to the What Really Happened radio show. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It's Thursday, March 5th, 2015. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. We have a lot of stuff to talk about today. The talking points list is really full. I don't even know if we're going to be able to get through it all. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. Tom is sitting in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, ready to answer the phones when you call on in. Now then, we are still seeing the fallout, if you will, from Netanyahu's speech before Congress last Tuesday. And we're seeing words like flop. In fact, a story out of 12160, Netanyahu's speech flops as Democratic senators withdraw their support for the Iran bill. Remember, yesterday we were talking about Mitch McConnell is going to try and bring a bill to the floor of the Congress so that Congress has the final say over the P5+1 agreement. This from the same Congress that didn't have a problem with Obama just writing the laws from his desk regarding immigration and health care and the rest of all that. But by golly, if it comes to Israel, we're going to stand up and show some spine here. And we are seeing another article over here, Netanyahu postmortems. This is from S.J. Lendman Blogspot. And honest analysts know that Netanyahu's double-barreled Washington offensive fell flat, targeting AIPAC and Congress, and basically saying the same thing other commenters are saying. Netanyahu brought nothing new to the podium. It is the same lies he has been saying for decades, and you would have to be brain dead not to know that they were lies, which I guess explains the standing ovations there on the floor of the Congress. So basically, in short, he came, he spoke, he fizzled. Needless to say, over in Israel, Bibi's opposition to the upcoming election, they're having a field day. And if Netanyahu thought his speech before Congress was going to help his campaign, boy, did he misjudge that one. And his opposition is already climbing on board, and boy, oh boy, Netanyahu's got to feel that he is in a corner right now, which makes him very dangerous. Cornered animals are always the most dangerous here. Another article over here at Reason.com. America must reject Netanyahu's war cry on Iran. Basically going down, saying the whole purpose of Netanyahu's being in the Congress was to derail the P5+1 and push the United States into invading Iran, because Netanyahu's not going to risk those very precious Israeli children on a war like that. That's what the Americans are for. We send the Americans to smash Iraq. We send the Americans to smash Iran. Because after all, those precious Israeli soldiers really didn't do all that well last time they went into Lebanon. Now, Iran's president, Hassan Rouhani, basically said the world is too intelligent to be fooled by Netanyahu's lies and warmongering, and it does seem that Rouhani is correct on that. And the good news we're getting is the P5+1 negotiations are continuing. Both sides are reporting progress. The Iranian negotiator came out and said, you know, nobody's falling for Netanyahu's hysteria, and apparently even John Kerry was there with kind of this disgusted look on his face. Now, at this moment, Kerry is aiming for a political framework by the end of the month, deadline, with the fine details to be worked out between now and June. Tehran's negotiators are taking a different tack. They're saying, look, we're so close. Let's just nail this thing right now. So if Netanyahu thought he was going to derail the P5+1, he's actually driven the two sides closer together. Because Netanyahu telegraphed to everybody that the world isn't buying all this fear-mongering that's going on. And it didn't help his case that Netanyahu was saying things that were so easy to dispute. Because the Iranian foreign minister, Mohammad Javad Zarif, pointed out that Netanyahu, when he's referencing the book of Esther, he's going to get all biblical on us and about going to Iran. Said, it's obvious Netanyahu hasn't actually read the book of Esther, because if you read the story, Iran saves the Jews. In fact, in history, Iran has saved the Jews 3 times. And Netanyahu thought he could get up there, just say whatever he wanted, and he would be believed by everybody because the corporate media was putting it out there. Except, of course, as we commented yesterday, ABC, NBC, and CBS wanted nothing to do with it. They did not carry his speech. Kudos to the networks for having better sense than to get tangled up with one more hysterical, screaming cartoon bomb rant from Netanyahu. So in a nutshell, Netanyahu is now in a real corner. He failed to derail the P5+1. He's demonstrated to the Israeli people that he's out of touch with their concerns, which are primarily domestic economic issues. His opposition is gaining because of this, and Netanyahu may be desperate enough to just unilaterally attack Iran on his own. And there's a very telling article over in Israel National News, and it's basically a puff piece trying to say, oh, Netanyahu did good, and anybody who thinks otherwise, they're just being anti-Semitic Jew haters, and all the rest of it. But it quotes Netanyahu saying, even if Israel has to stand alone, Israel will stand. They're telegraphing that Israel is serious, or rather Netanyahu. I don't think the Israeli high command is all hot and bothered to do this, but Netanyahu is still seriously considering a direct attack on Iran. And if he thinks that will win him re-election, he is sorely mistaken, because that radiation from the ruined power station is not going to stay in Iran. And the Israeli people know it. Not surprisingly, 24 hours after his utter failure on the floor of Congress, Netanyahu was out there claiming that the Israeli Navy has seized Iranian rockets on their way to Gaza. Now remember what I said about finding a lie by looking for what should be there and isn't. And what should be there and isn't is a reason for Iran to send weapons right now, at this point. They don't have one. This is another made-up fantasy by Netanyahu. He's trying to recover from his embarrassment on the floor of the U.S. Congress. And next they're going to say that Iran has a Death Star and Iran is, deliberately causing global warming or some such nonsense like that. All right, we're going to grab ourselves a quick phone call here. Al up in Canada, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. How are you?
I'm doing fine.
I wanted to touch on Netanyahu a little bit, and I also have a question concerning your T-shirts, because one of them I saw and I fell in love with. But anyways, getting back to Netanyahu, on your website, there's a post there, and it has to do with our parliament up here in Canada. And this guy, Paul Calandra, who's, of course, he's a neoconservative, is talking about Israel and his friends. And he's making references towards Israel when he was asked a question that had nothing to do with Israel. It was about Iraq. Anyways, a few days go by, and I guess he started crying when he was apologizing for it. And that sort of thing makes me sick. And it's kind of like what happened, with your Congress, except they were laughing. Sorry, they were clapping. But anyway, as far as your T-shirts go, I'm about 6 foot and about 230 pounds.
Mm-hmm.
And I was looking at, the golfer shirt.
Yeah.
So I was wondering, what size should I order? Should I order a large or extra large?
Well, I've been on a major weight loss program, so I'm not sure. But, over at Cafe Press, when you go there to look at the shirts, there's a little size chart, a size pull-down. And how tall are you again?
I'm about 6 foot and about 230.
That's not too bad. I would just be comfortable and go with a large. I don't even order the extra large anymore, and I'm just a hair under 6 feet, and as of this morning, I weighed 221.
Great. Okay. Thanks a lot, Mike. Also, I wish your Congress would be a little nicer to, this Netanyahu guy, because obviously he's infiltrated, the government up here as well, and, just recently.
Well, so. I think Israel's going to drop the U.S. because we're all burned out, and you guys are next. We got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and Israel's supporters and propagandists are still trying to salvage the situation. But the Netanyahu Titanic, Captain Rand Paul at the helm, by his own declaration, is down by the bow and sinking fast here. Alan Dershowitz is out there screaming that President Obama is obligated to seriously consider Netanyahu's new proposal, which was Iran scraps everything they've got nuclear, even though all of it is authorized under the Non-Proliferation Treaty. And I was very surprised to see an article over at silverdoctors.com echoing this claim that was recently made by MEK that Iran does have a nuclear weapons program that is so secret that the Mossad missed it, the IAEA missed it, CIA missed it, everybody in the world missed it except, of course, for MEK, which were the propaganda laundry for the laptop Odeth that turned out to be a fraud all those years ago. So they're still trying to save the situation, and they're out there screaming that anybody who didn't love Netanyahu's speech is just being an anti-Semitic Jew hater who wants Hitler to come back and gas Jewish babies in their sleep and whatever else they're saying here. Now then, at the same time Netanyahu was doing his little speech, there were protests taking place, which you didn't hear about in the corporate media, but they're reported over in Desert Peace. New Yorkers marched for peace with Iran. There were 2 demonstrations reported in this article, both of them opposed to war with Iran, one of them taking place right on the Israeli consulate, and another one right across the street. All of them just protesting against Netanyahu and his policies and his lies and fraud and deception here. Meanwhile, Rudy Giuliani, is in Berlin this weekend, going to be in Berlin this weekend, meeting with the Iranian dissident group that will be the new Iranian government after we go on in there and destroy them for having weapons of mass destruction. Is this sounding kind of familiar? You getting that sense of deja vu that we have been down this road before? Meanwhile, Rand Paul has introduced his Stand with Israel Act of 2015, which, among other things, calls for cutting all U.S. financial aid to Palestine until Palestine purges terrorists, renounces violence, and recognizes the state of Israel. Now, there's a couple of problems with that. First of all, Israel always initiates the violence. Second of all, it's hard to recognize a nation that refuses to draw its official borders. And that's been a sticking point all along. But I'll tell you this, and if any of you know Rand Paul, you can send this to him on my behalf. Palestine will recognize the state of Israel. They've said so 1 second after Israel recognizes the state of Palestine. But Rand Paul, even though he was photographed in Congress, kind of doing the slow clap with a disgusted look on his face, he wants to be president in 2016, and he doesn't care how many wars he has to start, how many people have to suffer, how many of your children have to die in wars. He's going to be president. He's got to outdo his father. I really do think that's a big part of Rand Paul. He's got daddy issues. He's got to outdo his father. And he'll make any moral compromise necessary to accomplish that, forgetting that his father's success in politics was that his father didn't compromise his morals and principles. And so in that context, Rand Paul has already come up short compared to Dr. Ron Paul. Now, even Louis Farrakhan has come out saying Netanyahu's goal with this little dog and pony show in Congress was to undermine Obama. And apparently that was Boehner's interest as well, which backfired when CBS, NBC, and ABC wouldn't carry the speech. But it's turned into a major political and diplomatic embarrassment for virtually all parties. Obama's looking good on this. Boehner's in violation of the Logan Act. Netanyahu has destroyed his credibility even more than it was already before. He's wrecked his own re-election back in Israel. I'm sure he's already on the phone ordering those Diebold electronic voting machines. Diebold, we guarantee the results. Now, it's getting a little more embarrassing out there, and I can understand why the government is really desperate to shut down the independent media here. There's a story over at LiveLeak. New photos have surfaced showing Nusra Front officers talking with Israel units in the Golan. Now, Israel's official position is they're neutral on the issue of Syria. And images obtained by Press TV are showing Israeli soldiers talking with the militants, rebels, whatever you want to call them, in the Golan Heights. And apparently Shin Bet has arrested an IDF Druze soldier who blew the whistle on this, these secret meetings between the Syrian rebels and IDF intelligence. Everybody's playing everybody against everybody else here. I imagine Obama must get up in the morning and say, okay, refresh me again. This morning briefing, we're supposed to be aiding these people today against these others that we were helping last week to go against the people that we're helping now, right? Try and sort it all out. Maybe they're setting their military policy with a dartboard. Today we are after Syria. Another little interesting story over in Press TV. Israeli settlers stormed the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound. And apparently these settlers wanted to go into the Al-Aqsa Mosque, did go into the Al-Aqsa Mosque and conduct Talmudic religious rituals. This is definitely a thumb in your eye moment for the Palestinians. And the Palestinians wanted to block the settlers, but apparently the settlers were protected by a large number of Israeli police. And apparently, on March 1st, just a few days ago, there was an Israeli court ruling mandating the Israeli police protect the settlers when they desecrate Muslim mosques. Now, can you imagine the fury that would erupt in this country if our government said police must offer protection to Protestants when they go on in and smash the statues in Catholic churches? Because the Protestants don't have that graven image thing. The Catholics are real big on graven images. And how would that play here? That's exactly what Israel is doing over there. Story out of 21st Century Wire. More U.S. aid and missiles shipped to Al-Qaeda, Al-Nusra, and ISIS in Syria and Iraq. And apparently photos have surfaced showing the Jabhat al-Nusra fighters brandishing U.S.-supplied tow missiles, as well as posing for pictures in front of boxes that are clearly stamped with U.S. insignia. And so this idea of covertly arming what we were told were once terrorist groups, the cover-up isn't working. How's the U.S. government going to respond? According to Blacklisted News, the U.S. is now going to openly arm the Syrian Al-Qaeda faction and Al-Nusra. Wasn't Al-Qaeda supposed to be the bad guys? We'll be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we're going to shift our little focus over here to Ukraine. We are continuing to see more and more reports coming out doubting the Western propaganda that Vladimir Putin personally strangled Boris Nemtsov to death. And we're seeing stories in 12160 saying that this smacks of American destabilization. Another story that we're looking at over here in Geopolitical Monitor. Putin had nothing to gain killing Nemtsov. Nemtsov was a fading political star. He had single-digit support. I know we had a caller in yesterday saying, well, maybe Putin killed Nemtsov and made it look like it was an American thing. Well, if you're going to go to that trouble, go after somebody who's really a threat to Putin, and Nemtsov was not in. In fact, he'd outlived his usefulness. Makes a perfect fall guy for a martyr. Somebody who's all burned out and you can't get anything more for him. I mean, Nemtsov was definitely pro-American, was trying to bring about a color revolution in Russia. And together with that and the scandal over U.S. aid, Russia is now focusing their internal security to counter color revolutions, which is a code name for covert U.S. destabilization and overthrow of governments that we don't like because they won't run their country for the benefit of our ultra-rich 1% here. All right, we're going to grab ourselves a quick phone call here. John in Barbados. Aloha, John. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind today?
Well, today, Michael, aloha. Thanks for having me on. Yeah, I'm looking at the situation in Syria and Iraq and Jordan and various other places. And my question to you is, how long before the Iraqi army, the Kurds and the tribesmen turn their guns on America? They've already shot down 2 or 3 American helicopters delivering weapons and 2 RAF transport airplanes delivering weapons. How much patience do these Americans think the Iraqis are going to have with America?
Well, not very much, because remember, Iraq started the operation against Tikrit without even informing the White House and then invited the Iranians in. And so whatever the outcome of this conflict, the U.S. has already lost their opportunity to be in control of the aftermath. And that's always the prize in these destabilization operations, is for the U.S. to be either overtly or covertly controlling the nation after it's all over. And very clearly, the present Iraqi government sees that's what's coming, and they don't want to have anything to do with it. Everybody's getting sick and tired of having their countries messed with by, the United States.
Well, I'm looking at this story coming out of Iraq and from the Iraqi government, and I'm particularly in John McCain's statement about Iran being involved, but according to the information that I've been reading, the commander of the forces attacking Tikrit is an Iranian general.
Yes.
And, this is a real smack in the face for McCain and his crew.
Of course it is. That's why the corporate media is all obsessed about that plane that ran off the runway this morning and all this other stuff. From a political, diplomatic perspective, the U.S. they're losing again in Iraq. This is the third invasion of Iraq, and the U.S. is failing to achieve its objectives.
And according to my information as well, the Kurdish Peshmergas in Syria, eastern and northeastern Syria are gaining ground, and the ISIS and al-Nusra and what have you are being squeezed between them and the Syrian army.
Well, remember, ISIS is just being put up as a straw man to justify invasions. I mean, they're screaming that ISIS is all over Libya now, and we have to go back in there because it's an ungoverned territory, and we've got to bring Western democracy and private central banking back to them. But I don't think ISIS, meaning this manufactured enemy, is really that capable militarily. The name ISIS is getting applied to a lot of people it should not be applied to, meaning those people in other countries who are trying to kick the Americans out. Oh, we don't need to listen to their political concerns and how America has abused their nation. They're ISIS. They behead people. They set people on fire. We just have to go kill them. Your children have to go kill them. I'm staying at home.
Well, what I'm hearing as well is that in Libya now, the rebels, so-called, have kicked the government out, and now they control all the oil wells and oil fields and most of the oil port.
Yeah, I love this little term of craft they're using in the corporate media of Libya's internationally recognized parliament, which is trying to legitimize, this manufactured government in waiting. The U.S. puppet rulers got kicked out of Libya, and they're trying to gin up some way where we'll support going in and having a second invasion of Libya to reassert our imperial control over them. The Libyans don't want them. The American people are just sick and tired of wars, and we're sick and tired of all the lies. And, again, this whole thing is just crumbling. Nobody's believing the fact that Netanyahu did as badly as he did before Congress, compared to his earlier appearances, they should have gotten the warning when he created over at the UN with his cartoon bomb. Those old methods of propaganda and conquest went out of style 50 years ago.
Absolutely. I mean, his speech was a joke. I just couldn't listen all the way through it because it was so ridiculous. There were so many, lies. What can you say? They're just outright lies. Even the Mossad has told him that the Iranians are not after nuclear weapons.
Well, the Mossad did not go public with that. That was a leaked memo, but it's the same thing. IAEA has found no evidence. Mossad's found no evidence. It's a rehash of, they've got weapons of mass destruction, or they're about to have weapons of mass destruction, therefore we have to attack them before they attack us. And remember, Iran has not initiated a war of conquest in over 200 years. That's the job of Israel and the United States, which can't go for 6 weeks without bombing and killing somebody. Anyway, listen, John, I got one more call I want to get to before the commercial break, so thank you very much. We're going to let you go. We're going to switch over here to Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike.
Hi,
John. I don't know if you talked about this yesterday, about the renminbi billboards going up in Bangkok and some other parts around the world about renminbi, a global currency.
We mentioned it briefly, and, China's obviously very proud of their rising currency, but this is going to certainly elevate the priority of starting a conflict with China, over in Washington, D.C.
And I wanted to tell people to read that article you had posted about that was in the Japan Times or one of those about Russia's economy is not as bad as people think. It's a great article. I think everybody should read it about how the ruble. Everybody's saying the ruble's bad, but in reality, it's not that bad.
No, I mean, Russia's economy has suffered harm because of this oil price war, but Europe, the United States, certainly Venezuela, and even Canada have actually suffered more harm from this.
And on Eurasian Economic Union, I think Armenia is going to be next in adding to the list.
Could very well be. All these countries know the dollar is going to implode. They're trying to get out, and they're leaving the dollar faster than the U.S. can conquer them. It's already a failed agenda, but our government will never admit that they're wrong. Bad planning, error, they won't change course, and that's why it's really going to get bloody and ugly before this is all over.
Yeah, because Victoria Nuland, didn't she just visit Kyrgyzstan?
Yeah, trying to keep them in the fold, and I don't think she was very well received over there.
Yeah, because a lot of people don't know this about Armenia and Kyrgyzstan. They had a rocky relationship, I believe.
They may be fanning up a war over there to break up that Central Asian Union.
Yeah, I don't think it's possible now. It's if you look at the stock market, the way things are going, and all the bad news, Baltic Dry, all that, things are just not going to get better. People need to, get prepared.
Yeah, well, they're really, really bad, but sooner or later, the illusion is going to collapse, and then we'll really be into the final stage of this. We got to take a break for commercials. Thank you very much for the phone call, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we're looking at this story that's over in Sputnik News. The Council of Europe is extending sanctions against former Ukraine President Viktor Yanukovych and members of his entourage. More restrictive measures, which means if he comes into Europe, he can't go anywhere, can't talk to anybody. The reason they're doing this, I don't think, is out of spite. We are seeing more and more indications that the people of Ukraine and much of its military are getting ready to give President Willy Wonka the old heave-ho. And obviously, Yanukovych would be well positioned to return to power with world awareness that he was driven from office in a coup d'etat. He could make a stunning comeback like Hugo Chavez. And from the point of view of the European Union and the United States, that's not what they want. Even if President Poroshenko is kicked out, they still want to be in control of the aftermath. And that's why they're starting to harass Yanukovych and try and limit his availability to talk to people, to go out and seek funding and support for a return to power. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian Foreign Ministry has yanked the accreditation for all Russian media inside Ukraine, including TASS. They don't want the Russian media in there pointing out how the Ukrainian media is basically lying to everybody. So TASS now knows what it feels like to be the independent media in this country here. Very alarming story out of DefenseNews.com. U.S. Army official, Atlantic Resolve may expand. Now, Atlantic Resolve is the name of the operation to pre-position U.S. troops into Romania and Bulgaria as a deterrence to Russian aggression. Forgetting that this is all U.S., EU, NATO aggression, but they're going to expand Operation Atlantic Resolve to include Hungary, the Czech Republic, and Georgia. And this is a very troubling piece of news because coupled with it is the announcement that 6 NATO warships have arrived in the Black Sea for military drills. So, war is ready to go. 6 NATO ships are in the Black Sea for military drills. We've already had that one incident where the Russian electronic warfare plane was able to paralyze the Donald Cook. So let's say that somebody, who shall remain nameless, sneaks a submarine through the Bosphorus. And they snuggle up real close to that Ukrainian coast, or Crimea. And they flip off a cruise missile at one of those NATO ships and blow it up. And say, oh look, Russia's attacked our fleet and this is war, and they're off and running again. Any reason for them not to do it? Look how they got us into the Spanish-American War when the USS Maine exploded from a coal bunker fire, according to its own captain in subsequent investigations. Oh no, a Spanish mine blew it up. We must go to war. That's how these wars get started. It's inevitable. There's going to be some kind of a manufactured event where they're going to say, well, we're in a state of war and there's no use arguing about it or debating the right and wrong anymore. We've got to go. Story out of Russia Insider. 600 U.S. paratroopers will arrive in Ukraine by the end of the week. That's tomorrow. Ostensibly to train the Ukrainian National Guard. They're not combat soldiers. They're trainers. They're advisors. They're there to advise. That's how we got suckered into Vietnam here. Now, on the principle of if at first you don't succeed, lie again, the United States has once again gone up to the United Nations Security Council, calling for tough measures against Syria because it's using chlorine gas. You think after how many times they've tried to use the same excuse, they'd back off and say, we got to come up with something new and original here, but apparently not. And when I posted this story at whatreallyhappened.com, I did include a screen capture of this article that was in the Daily Mail about how the United States backed a plan to launch chemical weapons attacks in Syria and blame it on Assad. That's what they do. And apparently today at the House Appropriations Committee, Joint Chiefs of Staff Chairman General Martin Dempsey said it is now likely U.S. ground troops will be needed inside Syria for the war on ISIS, meaning the war on Assad. Here's your rifle, Martin. Everybody needs to download that official enlistment form for the armed forces, and anybody who says, I'm in favor of war, you mail it to them and say, look, either you or your kids sign up, then we'll listen to you. And looking for another reason to send troops back into Libya, story out of prisonplanet.com. The next 9/11 will come out of Libya. How can they possibly know that? They're basically saying if we don't go in and reconquer Libya and get rid of ISIS, they will launch a new 9/11 from there. The lies are getting desperate and fortunately uncoordinated and repetitive. People are picking up on it here. Alrighty, we're coming up here on the top of the hour. We're going to start on Hillary Rodham Clinton's email gate. And Hillary's already out there saying, what difference does it make? Now, Hillary Clinton is trying to contain the political damage by asking the State Department to go ahead and release all of her emails. Well, the State Department didn't have her emails. She wasn't using State Department computers. She's assuring us that she's sending copies of all of her emails from her own personal server in the basement of her home to the State Department, and nobody should ever doubt Hillary and think that she might erase certain emails or alter certain emails. Of course, we just have to take her word. These are the real emails here. Which is nonsense. If she's not trying to conceal things, why have her own server in her own home? And her defenders are already out there saying, well, technically what she did wasn't really illegal, kind of, sort of, maybe. But then you go out and you look at how Hillary was bashing Bush for secret White House email accounts. And basically, at one point, Hillary's State Department forced the resignation of an ambassador for using private emails. So she knows it's an issue. And basically, it undermines this idea that we're going to have a transparent administration under Hillary Rodham Clinton. And it shows incredibly poor controversy. Because incredibly poor security. It was a reckless, stupid thing to do. And ultimately, if she's following the law and doing what she's supposed to be doing, there was no reason for Hillary Clinton to have a private email system for herself and her top aides. There is no reason, unless you're conducting traffic that you don't want to be seen. Now, Hillary's defenders are out there saying, well, it's really no big deal. What difference does it make? So she had a private email. It's not a problem. The problem is from the technical side. Because it turns out analysis of her server before it was taken down, because it's not working as of right now, show that it's not really secure. They were basically relying on the fact that nobody was ever going to know about it, but its SSL certificate was expired, and it's using interfaces that are known to have huge security holes, which means Hillary Clinton, by having her own server, exposed her emails regarding State Department policy to potential foreign spies in order to hide them from the American public. And, it's amazing. They're just thrashing over this thing about, it's not a big deal. Why a big deal? But Hillary's State Department fired an ambassador for using private email. Hillary's excoriated the Bush White House for private secret emails here. And by the way, the State Department technology experts told Hillary Clinton her private email service was weak for security and that she should be using the government's fortified and monitored systems. And even the State Department technician said she's wide open to having this system hacked. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Hour number 2. The phone lines are open. 877-300-7645. 877-300-7645. We're talking about Email Gate. Hillary Rodham Clinton, just before she took office as Secretary of State, set up her own private email server in the basement of her home, and she and her top State Department aides were using that. Now, her defenders are already out there saying it's no big deal. It's not technically a violation of the law. I'm not even sure they're correct on that, because a couple of points you need to understand. There's Hillary's really private email for her personal life, like Bill, Susan called, the pregnancy test came back negative. That's private email, and she can use a private email service for that. But as a constitutional officer of the federal government, the Secretary of State, all emails and communications related to her job are the property of the American people and may not be treated like her personal private correspondence. That's the whole intent behind the Federal Public Records Act. Every communication within the government is supposed to be kept available for review by the public and certainly by congressional investigators. It's that simple here. Now, we're already hearing from the White House that, hey, we had no idea this was going on. The White House counsel's office was saying, we didn't know. We absolutely did not know. So it's now been officially denied, which means the White House did know. Remember when Obama insisted he did not know about the IRS targeting his enemies until he heard it on the news? And then the IRS emails that would have either refuted or verified that claim suddenly disappeared. The dog ate my hard drive. And behind that, let us not forget that as the chief executive in charge of the executive branch, it's Obama's job to know what is going on with his subordinates, especially the Secretary of State. So if he's not criminally complicit in this evasion of the Federal Records Act, then he's just admitted to being inept. Take your pick. Now, apparently they don't have their talking points all sorted out at the White House, because the White House Press Secretary Josh Earnest is out there saying, well, I don't know who knew and didn't know about Hillary's private email server. And while all this was going on, back in 2013, Hillary Clinton came out with this statement, we've been as transparent as we can, and I believe in transparency. So, of course, I've got all of my top-level emails in a private server in the basement of my home. Now, a lot of people have been looking at the name the server was registered under, Eric Hodaham, which doesn't seem to exist. Well, there's a very interesting theory being promoted over at Free Beacon that Eric Hodaham is actually longtime Clinton aide Eric Hotham. And this is a guy who's been involved in the Clintons' dirty work going way, way back. All righty. Story out of Wired.com, why Clinton's private email server was such a security fail. She was so concerned about hiding what she was doing from the American people, she made herself and the U.S. State Department wide open to foreign spies, to the NSA, which we know likes to dig out dirt with which to blackmail politicians. So setting the issue of legality and propriety aside, Clinton basically mishandled classified information, just like Petraeus did, and he lost his job. And we're seeing from Wired and from a whole bunch of other technical forums that this server was not very secure at all. Now, apparently, according to Judicial Watch, basically over the last several years, the Clinton administration has tried to conceal 1.8 million email communications from Judicial Watch's attorneys and federal investigators and Congress. And apparently there's a story circulating around that a White House computer contractor attempted to reveal that there was secret email communications going on and was threatened with jail for revealing it. Alrighty, let's see. Well, I got a few more stories about the email. I'm going to get to James in Tokyo here in a minute because I'm coming up on his topic here. Alrighty, we're seeing an article over in Boston Herald. Hillary Clinton's email scandal may dash presidential hopes. Yeah, because it doesn't matter whether you're a feminist or not. You've got to be looking at what she's doing. She's trying to hide things from the American people. That's a quality we cannot tolerate in a president. And she showed poor judgment in her concealment by actually making this classified information potentially vulnerable to foreign and domestic spy organizations here. But we're seeing all these stories out here, like the Daily Beast is out there saying, it's not really a scandal. It's technically, she wasn't required to do blah, 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 blah. Now, here's a very alarming article over at the Examiner. Hillary Clinton apparently leaked intelligence to hurt Israeli war plans using her non-government email system, and was complicit in the leaking of classified intelligence regarding military operations plans formulated by Netanyahu to destroy Iran's nuclear programs. This is going back to that story we heard where Netanyahu was considering a strike on Iran last year and blocked by the White House. So here we have Hillary leaking classified information, just like Edward Snowden did. And if Snowden is being charged under the Espionage Act, then so should Hillary. Now, in all fairness to Hillary, she may have been acting on the orders of Barack Obama, but he's never going to own up to that. He'll let her twist in the wind slowly, slowly, slowly. Interesting little story about corruption coming out of Hillary's tenure as Secretary of State. Right after the State Department sent Haiti billions of dollars in aid, Hillary Rodham Clinton's brother, Tony Rodham, got one of only 2 gold exploration permits from the Haitian government, the first issued in over 50 years. I'm sure it's just a coincidence. What difference does it make here? And apparently, on March 23rd at the Toner Prize celebration, Hillary Clinton will be giving a speech. They've already notified everybody that she will not take any questions whatsoever. All right, we're coming up on a commercial break. I know I've got 2 callers. I'm going to ask you to be patient through the commercial break so I can come back and spend some time with you. But one little more story about the Clintons you probably need to understand. That property in Chappaqua, where this private email server sits, the Clintons bought it so that Hillary could establish residency to run for Senate in New York. Makes sense. Now, the Secret Service, which is still protecting them because Bill is a former president, had to build an additional building on the property to house their Secret Service agents. And under New York law, that building is now the property of the Clintons. And the Clintons are charging the U.S. federal government $10,000 a month rent for the Secret Service building, which happens to be the amount of their mortgage. So you, the taxpayer, are paying for their house, their Secret Service protection, transportation. Clinton still gets his salary. She still gets Senate perks. Huge amount of money. Not costing them one little tiny bit here. By the way, more emails that have come out are showing Democrat Elijah Cummings as involved in the targeting of the voter rights group True the Vote. And so that whole IRS targeting is, they're starting to hit pay dirt. They're starting to get the big names. Okay. All right. When we come back from the commercial break, we're going to be talking about the Boston bombing. I know one of our callers wants to talk about that, and we're going to take the phone calls right after these words. Oh, hi, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're going to be talking about the Boston bombing here because as the trial of Dzhokhar Tsarnaev gets underway, the media is just replaying all the video of the aftermath of the bombing, none of which is actually evidence of anybody's particular guilt. They're just trying to revive the horror and the shock. So you won't think too carefully about what's going on in that courtroom because it's a show trial. That's all it is. It's a kangaroo court. The judge is limiting evidence on the older brother's activities and apparently will not limit testimony by the survivors of the bombing about how grisly and horrible everything was. They're just going to put on this show and shock the jury into saying, oh, somebody must pay for this, and it's going to be Dzhokhar here. And his attorney, Judy Clark, she's the fixer. She was represented Ted Kaczynski and all these other patsies, get them to confess to the crime to cement the official story, and then they get sent away. And Dzhokhar obviously does not have access to the internet, or he would have seen how we've already proven the Tsarnaev brothers were innocent. It's the wrong backpacks. All right, we're going to take some phone calls here. James in Tokyo, Ohio gozaimasu, what's on your mind?
Michael, I have a feeling that you're not going to be voting for Hillary.
Well, yeah. And I will confess, it's a little personal here. I try and be objective about all the news and development, but with the Clintons, it's personal, because 21 years ago, when I stumbled across evidence that the FBI was manufacturing evidence in the death of Vince Foster, like a good little citizen, see something, say something, and I tried to say something, and my career in Hollywood got wrecked. There was all these rumors all over the town about what a terrible person I was. I was doing drugs, I was stealing, and all the rest of this other stuff. And 21 years later, I am going to return the favor. If not this year, then in 2016. Yes, it's personal.
Well,
I will admit to that.
Well, it wonders why we're paying all the money for the NSA, but you're overreacting for the emails after Benghazi, Vince Foster, as you mentioned, which you did good work on, and recently, Bill has possibly been mentoring young adults on Epstein's Playland Island in the Bahamas.
That's a polite way of putting
that's
it.
That's not what I was calling. Oh, by the way, I did hear John in Barbados mentioning when is the Iraqis might be shooting at the Americans. Well, it seems like they've already have been.
Yeah, that's just happening around the fringes there, Anyway, so what else?
The Boston bombing.
Yes. The
Boston bombing. Yeah, this is something that I'm not getting nightmares about, but while I'm awake, it's something that really bothers me. Like what you said, like they're trying to limit evidence. They've also been trying to limit a video of him, just showing him only walking around with a backpack and not placing it anywhere. They try to limit that. As you mentioned, they got the lawyer for the patsies. They've been harassing witnesses
Yes.
out of his friends. 3 of them have been deported, including the girlfriend of the guy, I think it's Sarnath or someone who was...
And they murdered the one down in Florida. Yeah,
they murdered him. They deported his girlfriend. They deported 2 other friends of the alleged Boston bomber, and one is up for deportation now. And they threaten all the friends. They harass them. They follow them 24 hours a day. They arrest them. They keep them without lawyers. I mean, this is so what you were saying about the bags, I mean, it seems like a pretty logical and straightforward thing. And with your website and being on Alex Jones and, with the connection, he's on the same network. it seems somehow there could be some type of something where people could sign up and, you know, I don't know, to a congressman or to somebody where, you know, to get them to look into this.
No, they already know it. They already know it. They already know it. But the official story will be it was an act of terror. The terrorists are coming to get you. This government will never admit error and mistake. And so this is why I don't sign on board with all these calls. We need a new investigation into 9/11. No, it's just another opportunity for the government to polish the official lies. This government operates on a myth of governmental infallibility, like papal infallibility. We don't make mistakes no matter how badly we screw up. And so there's going to be nobody in Congress who's going to respond to this thing. We know it's all over the net. Judy Clark certainly has to know it. Everybody involved in this knows what really went down, and they are right now trying to protect the official legend.
Yeah, not someone, you know, someone who's, you know, who's not on board. I don't really know who, but I'm just saying, you know, something should really try to be done to, you know, prevent this kid from spending his life in jail for something.
Well, I'm afraid he's going to go away the way James Earl Ray did, but what we all should be doing is taking those photos of the Tsarnaevs in their gray backpacks, the remains of the bomb in the black backpack, the image of the guy wearing the black backpack with the little white rectangle, and we should email them to everybody we know so that no matter how much the government pushes the official story, we the people will know that once again we are being lied to. That's the best thing all of you can do right now.
All right. Thank you very much. It's great talking to you.
Thank you very much. We're going to switch over real quick to Jay in Maryland. Aloha, Jay. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Mike, it's an honor to talk to you.
Thank you, sir.
I am looking out my door here. I'm getting dumped on in Maryland with a ton of global warming. And
we got like 20 inches down on the Big Island last night. I got a picture of this guy snowboarding, you know, right near the observatory.
I guess I'm wondering, you commented on global warming, and I saw your comments in an article. I don't know if it was the Atlantic or something. It's been a few weeks back. You were one of the comments listed. And,
okay.
And you mentioned on the air, but I can't remember which magazine it was, but you commented, and the only thing people could do in response to you was throw insults and ad hominem attacks, and I'm just, you know, it seems like that's all they have left is to insult and that's all they have left to people. I mean, are we winning the debate?
Yeah, we're definitely winning the debate when we get down to the insults and name calling here. I mean, there's a strategy that lawyers and politicians use, which is, first of all, you argue the facts, and if the facts are against you, you argue the logic. If the logic's against you, argue the facts, and if both the facts and logic are against you, you call the other side names, and that's the stage we're at right now. So I don't pay attention to that nonsense.
The other topic I wanted to mention was an alarming article I saw about military recruiting in the U.S., which said that only about 25% of those who apply to the armed forces are deemed acceptable, and the rest get disqualified for all kinds of reasons, and it seems kind of alarming. And you know, what's going to happen when people leave the military and retire or whatever? Who's going to replace them?
Well, I know the Army Reserve has lowered their requirements of people they will let in, and sooner or later I'm sure the regular Army will as well. But the next big bang, they will start the draft again, and they'll be grabbing the best and healthiest and brightest of our young people to drop into that shredder. We got to take a break for commercials. Thank you very much for the phone call, Jay, and we will be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show, and we're talking about the Boston bombing. And I want to preface the rest of this with a reminder about the Martin Luther King assassination and the patsy for that, James Earl Ray, who was provided an attorney by the government who said, they absolutely have you dead to rights. You will be found guilty. Your only possible solution is to plead guilty, and you will get a light sentence. So James Earl Ray said, all right, pled guilty. The judge sentenced him to life without parole. James Earl Ray said, wait a minute, I want to change my plea. And the judge said, no, too late. You're off and you're running. And fought to keep him there until he died. And what was really interesting is, it turned out James Earl Ray's rifle had a manufacturing defect. When the FBI ballistics department tested it, it left these deep score marks on the bullets fired from the gun. The bullets recovered from Dr. Martin Luther King's body did not have that score mark on them. And so James Earl Ray's attorneys said, we need to look at the evidence. And it stalled and stalled and stalled and stalled and stalled, and the FBI said, we don't need to do another test. The rifle wasn't cleaned properly, that's why it was going on. And they basically stalled it until James Earl Ray died in prison, which if he'd been allowed out, his medical condition could have been treated and he would have lived. But they just locked him up until he died. That's what they're going to do with Dzhokhar Tsarnaev. And his primary attorney, Judy Clark, has a track record of being the go-to girl to represent all of these patsies. Ted Kaczynski, the underwear bomber, all of these people, get them to plead guilty to confirm the official story, promise that they're going to get lenient treatment, and it doesn't happen. And they're showing all these videos of the aftermath. They're letting all the victims testify. You know, and you can just get the jury and the public say, oh, it was horrible. Somebody must be made to pay. And then the government will say, this is the guy. Send him away forever. But if I were Dzhokhar Tsarnaev's attorney, I could get him off in a jury trial. Take me one day to do it. And the evidence is there on the front page of my website, and you can go out and hunt it all down yourself all over the web. The photograph of the remains of the backpack bomb clearly show a black backpack with an easily recognizable white rectangular patch on it. The photos of the Tsarnaev brothers before the bombing show them carrying gray backpacks. But there was this other group of individuals in the area wearing black parkas and khaki pants, standing alone. You wouldn't notice them. Standing together, it's obviously a uniform, and one of them is photographed wearing a black backpack with a white rectangular patch on it, and more significantly, after the bombing, this same man is photographed without his backpack. That's your reasonable doubt right there. And Judy Clark is not going to bring it up because her job is not to protect her client, but to protect the official story. Now, you remember that video that the FBI has insisted all along that shows Dzhokhar Tsarnaev dropping the black backpack just before it explodes? Well, nobody can seem to find it. And some of Dzhokhar Tsarnaev's lawyers say they don't think it exists here. You remember after the bombing, Governor Patrick described the surveillance video and how horrible it was, and it was chilling. And then, under the press of the interviewer, had to admit that no, he hadn't actually seen the video. So if Judy Clark were really working for her client, she would say that all of this talk about a video showing Tsarnaev doing this that doesn't actually exist, that tainted the pool of jurors in Boston. And that's grounds to relocate the trial someplace else. But Judy Clark is not there to take care of Dzhokhar Tsarnaev. She is there to protect the government. Our justice system is not just. It's expedient. You can ask people like Bruno Richard Hauptmann how that works out. Now, we have been seeing this group of pro-Israel supporters in the U.S. screaming about this 28-page redacted report from the official 9/11 report. And they've been waving around saying, you need to get this declassified. It says Saudi Arabia was behind 9/11, blah, 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 blah. Well, there's a very interesting story over in Press TV, quoting Gordon Duff, as saying that members of Congress who read the original report before the 28 pages were excised say those 28 pages do not point to Saudi Arabia. They point to Israel. And apparently, these 28 pages prompted AIPAC to just go and lobby Congress that this part had to be suppressed from the report. And anybody who's got 28 pages saying it was Saudi Arabia, it's another fake. It's another fraud. For a very simple reason. Saudi Arabia makes a huge amount of money off the United States because of the petrodollar deal. Saudi Arabia has invested much of that money in the United States of America. They're not going to carry out any kind of an attack that would allow the U.S. government to simply say, all right, we're freezing your assets, we're keeping the money. And if Saudi Arabia wanted to hurt the United States of America, they don't need to crash airplanes into skyscrapers to do it. All they got to do is ask for their money back. And the whole financial system will come crashing down because it's a lot of money. And it would be perfectly legal for Saudi Arabia to do that. Always look for what should be there and isn't. And what isn't there is a motive for Saudi Arabia to do 9/11. other than as part of the network with the U.S. and Israel to do 9/11 to launch a century of unending war against Saudi Arabia and Israel's regional rivals. So forth and so on. So, getting on to the economy. Interesting story out of Wall Street on parade. Citigroup, Morgan Stanley, Merrill Lynch all received $6 trillion in backdoor bailouts from the Fed. This is going on back to 2008 where the Congress passed TARP, and they violated the Constitution doing that, by the way, because the Constitution says revenue measures have to originate in the House. The House voted TARP down. The Senate then passed a bill, then arm-twisted the House to ratify it. TARP was illegal and unconstitutional right from the beginning. But apparently at the same time, all of this TARP was going through Congress, the Federal Reserve was making these backdoor bailouts totaling $13 trillion to just a handful of the large Wall Street financial institutions. And Citigroup, Morgan Stanley, Merrill Lynch got $6 trillion of that. Propping themselves up. Interesting story out of Washington's blog. The guy who invented quantitative easing, Richard Werner, he's an economics professor at the University of Southampton, is out there saying it's easy to create a full-blown economic recovery. The problem is the central banks are choosing to make the banksters richer instead of helping Main Street. And it is a reminder, these private central banks do not exist to serve the public and the nation. They serve themselves. They always have. They always will. And that is why wealth inequality continues and why no nation should ever allow its money supply to fall under the control of private central bankers. You show me one nation on earth in history with that banking model that was not driven into poverty and despair for the people and debt slavery. It's that simple. The common enemy of all mankind are those private central banks. And fortunately, the world is waking up to that. Now, Paolo Battista, one of the executive directors of the IMF, has come out and said the Greek bailout was not to save Greece. It was to protect the German and French banks from default. And we know that much of that money that went into Greece immediately came right back out to the bondholders, did not help the people of Greece. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Now, the European Central Bank has announced it is adopting quantitative easing. The ECB is going to create 60 billion euros out of thin air to purchase government bonds and private sector assets to keep it all propped up. Because after all, look how well QE worked here in the United States of America. So, of course, Europe's going to do exactly the same here. Meanwhile, story coming out of Zero Hedge, the European Central Bank is cutting their rates to minus 3%. And they're still out there saying that negative rates are working just great. People aren't fleeing the banks like we thought they might. They will sooner or later. It's only a matter. Negative interest rates work great for the bankers, not for the savings account holders. That's just common sense. At some point, when that negative rate gets high enough, people are going to say, why am I leaving my money in the bank where they are just nibbling it away every day and could, in the event of a crisis, simply grab it all? And by the way, that is apparently starting to happen over in Ukraine. Apparently, a lot of the banks are not opening their doors, and it does appear that bail-ins have started. They're plundering the deposits of the savings account holders in Ukraine. They're running out of money over there. Now we know why yesterday Bloomberg was saying that the West, meaning you, the U.S. taxpayer, owes Ukraine a bailout. Coming apart over there. Over on Cyprus, there are protests against austerity. Austerity, which is a fancy name for stealing from the poor to give to the rich. The problem is, these money junkies That 1% of 1% who have trillions of dollars of wealth, and it's still not enough. They got to have more. If they don't get another zero after on the bottom of the ledger, they start to sweat and go into withdrawal. And they don't understand how their greed is actually destroying the very system that made them wealthy. And they've bought all the governments on earth, so nobody has the courage to stand up and say, for this economy to continue, there must be some mechanism to recirculate the wealth back down to the bottom so that workers can feed it back in. And that's the part that's missing, and that's why it's all starting to come down. Apparently, George Osborne was being interviewed over this HSBC tax dodge scandal, and apparently there were 6 questions he was asked where he just kind of squirmed and... It's amazing stuff over there. All right. According to ADP employment has dropped, misses the expectation of 219,000, and it's the weakest monthly gain in 6 months. Mark Zandi is admitting job growth is slowing. And the corporate media is out there saying, oh yes, the economy is doing really well. Trust us. Everything is fine. Don't get upset. Don't riot. Don't revolt. Everything is fine. You know, you may be hungry, but it's just you. Everybody else is fine. You may be under 20 feet of snow, but everybody else is roasty toasty. Royal Bank of Scotland is cutting over 2/3 of their investment-backed jobs. 14,000. Doesn't sound like the economy's working really well. Oprah Winfrey has fired 200 people from her enterprise in this great Obama economy. But I think the absolute nadir of political thinking happened up in Alaska. I hope he's joking. It didn't come across that way. Representative Don Young suggested that the way to end homelessness in Alaska is to just allow the wolves to wander through town. I hope he's joking. If he isn't, he's definitely overdosing on his prescription antidepressants. All right, as you've already heard, arguments were presented before the Supreme Court in the latest challenge to Obamacare regarding the exact wording of the law and whether or not federal subsidies are really available to everybody who signed up for Obamacare. And the issue has to do with whether or not they used one of the state exchanges. Now, as of right now, the court seems to be split, meaning that Chief Justice John Roberts will make the final decision. And if you remember back in 2012, Roberts was opposed to Obamacare, and then at the last second, 180-degree turn, said, it's okay under the Commerce Clause, legalized Obamacare, and then promptly left for a week's vacation in Malta to duck the press firestorm. And as I think we can assume the persuasion that caused his sudden reversal in 2012 has not likely gone away, I'm expecting that he's going to come back and say, yeah, we're ruling for the administration. Let's see, story out of RIMP.com. Obama's biggest lie about Obamacare, promised universal coverage, but delivered a plan that was impossible. 85% of Americans had coverage in 2008, and it's only a couple of percent higher right now. It's far short of the promised 100%. And most of the people who are now covered are covered with more expensive policies with sky-high deductibles. This whole law was all for the benefit of the health insurance industries to make them rich in the hope that it would generate further tax revenues for a desperately broke government. Didn't really work. Now, here's a story that I think shows just how completely bonkers our immigration system has become. Apparently, there was a family coming down from Canada to go to Walt Disney World in Florida. And apparently, the family was coming through customs. They were stopped. They were subjected to an enhanced search, which included demands for the passwords onto their smart devices. The family was rather reluctant to do that because they've got personal items on there. And the customs enforcement confiscated all their electronic devices, denied them entry, sent them back home to Canada. And this is the comment coming from the United States Customs and Border Protection. Travelers are responsible for proving their innocence. That's the new policy. So the United States government has gone back to Code Napoleonic justice, where the government can declare you guilty without proof and demand that you prove a negative. This from the exact same United States Customs and Border Protection that has turned a blind eye to millions of illegal immigrants pouring into this nation with no intention of ever returning home. That was their excuse to send this family back. We're not sure you'll leave the United States of America. And the head of this family is an emergency room doctor in Toronto. If he wanted to stay in the U.S., how is that a bad thing? He's got skills that we need. He's certainly a more desirable citizen than uneducated, unskilled, and sometimes infectious illegals. It's absurd. Apparently up in Quebec, Canadian authorities have charged a man for not giving up his phone password at the border. Do you really think terrorists and criminals are going to hide things on their smart devices in an age where they know those devices are compromised? It's nonsense. And apparently here in the U.S., the Customs and Border Patrol want the same authority. You will be compelled to provide a password or access to your electronic devices, or we will do bad things to you. Real criminals and terrorists are going to have whatever's incriminating data hidden on a micro SD card, hidden inside a hollowed-out coin, or some other such dodge. They know better. What do they think they're going to find on the smart devices of ordinary citizens? Business secrets, Aunt Mary's top secret chocolate chip cookie recipe, nude photos of wives and daughters that they can drool over. This is a complete waste of time and money, on top of being a constitutional violation. TSA's never actually caught a real terrorist. They're just out there making money by groping and fondling and stealing things, dropping laptops. It's become the security industrial complex, and it's just as corrupting to our society as the military industrial complex or the medical industrial complex. It's all driven by money and greed. We'll be back after the news. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, third hour. Phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. Tom is still in our control room, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Looking around the web and the TV, the Hillary Clinton camp has already launched their latest strategy to deal with the private email server. And it's summed up by saying, it's old news. And apparently Hillary supporters, when you talk to them about the private server, they throw their hands up and say, are we going to have to go through that again? We haven't gone through it once yet for its full ramifications. And they're trying to do this, it's so yesterday, it's so last year. But if you go back and you look over Hillary's career, the cattle futures trades, travel office firings, Vince Foster posing with a known cocaine smuggler in front of the White House Christmas tree, being fired from the Watergate Committee for unethical behavior. There is a clear pattern here. And Hillary supporters are all, it's old. That was yesterday. Yeah, it was yesterday. And the day before, and the day before, and the month before, and the year before, and the decade before. There's a consistent pattern. And if you think Netanyahu was insulting to the intelligence of the average American, it's got nothing on Hillary Clinton. She thinks this is actually going to work. So yesterday, forget all about it. We have other things to do. Now, we're hearing from over in the Moscow Times that President Barack Obama has issued another executive order to extend the sanctions against Russia by another year, citing a threat to national security. Says he's dealing with the continuing unusual and extraordinary threat to the national security and foreign policy of the United States. That latter part is what this is really all about. Russia's getting in the way of U.S. foreign policy because it's a more attractive nation to align with than the United States. How dare they do that? Somebody just shared with me a very bizarre ad on Craigslist. And I posted it to whatreallyhappened.com. The headline for this list on this ad on Craigslist: Ukrainian Russian men needed, $19 an hour. We are military contractors working directly with the U.S. Marine Corps, assisting them with their immersive simulation training program. Currently, we are looking for role players of Ukrainian and or Russian ethnicity and language skills. And it goes on with the pay and the health benefits and all the rest of that. So the Marines are already training to go into Ukraine and Russia. Amazing here. Now, local to home. Over in Chicago, outrage is spreading over Homan Square. As well it should. This is Guantanamo inside the U.S. borders. Now, defenders of this program are saying that this was all legalized by the 2012 National Defense Authorization Act. They are wrong. What the NDAA authorized was coercive means related to the war on terror, not on ordinary street criminals and protesters. So they're mounting a huge protest in Chicago on Saturday to shut down Homan Square. And the anger is over the fact that they're using these CIA-like tactics, shackling stress positions, not on terror suspects, but on ordinary criminals and American dissidents. That is not America. And this is probably going to negatively impact Rahm Emanuel, who's coming up on a runoff election, because he won't condemn what's going on there. And the people of Chicago are saying, how hard can it be to condemn police torture? It's pretty much a black and white issue. There's not much gray area there. Department of Justice, of course, has come out confirming that the police in Ferguson were racially biased, but nobody's going to get prosecuted. This has triggered more protests in Ferguson, which has triggered more police brutality. Now, here's a very bizarre story, and we need to pay attention to this one. This is up in the Star, up in Canada. And apparently, there is this children's hospital that has, for the last 5 years, when a child comes in, they take a sample of the hair, and they send it out to an outside laboratory called the Mother Risk Program. And they test that sample of hair for drugs or anything else that they think might indicate child abuse or even parental substance abuse. And based on those lab reports only, children have been taken away from their parents. Well, now the Ministry of the Attorney General has put a halt to this and launched an investigation, because an investigation by the Star raised questions about the reliability of these test results, even though they're routinely accepted in Ontario courts as evidence of parental abuse. Before you go out and start taking samples from somebody or sticking needles in their body, should you not make sure it's really going to work, instead of this attitude of, well, let's give this a try and see how it works out. And then after it's all over, oh, I guess we really did mess that up, didn't we? We're sorry. And meanwhile, these kids have been traumatized by being taken away from their parents. It's not like they're going to move back in with their family and everything's going to return to being hunky-dory. It's amazing. The Republican-controlled Senate has failed to override Obama's veto of the Keystone Pipeline bill. Overriding a presidential veto requires a two-thirds majority. They fell short by 5 votes. Now, getting on back to the NSA spying on everybody, new revelations from Snowden are showing the scale of the Five Eyes program, and they're now focusing on New Zealand, which has been one of the major hubs for this program. And again, this is nothing new. This all goes back to another program called Echelon in the 1980s. And we have Echelon/NSA/Five Eye facilities here on the island of Oahu. Big, gigantic antennas. And we're looking at a story coming out of IntelliHub where the spy agencies are using what they describe as a giant vacuum cleaner to collect all the data across the Pacific. And they've been doing it since 2009. In the days of Echelon, where they didn't have the necessary equipment, they were basically going after people they thought might be guilty of some wrongdoing. But now they're just sucking it all up. It's got to be a gigantic data management program. I can't imagine that they're able to actually make any sense out of all this data. And maybe that's the reason why NSA hasn't actually found any terrorists with all this stuff. Along with being too busy looking at all the free porn they're getting off of people's smart devices here. Now, we're hearing more and more calls for curbs on the surveillance state. This is over in RINF.com. But unfortunately, some of these NSA documents are saying that this surveillance technology is so firmly embedded in our infrastructure, in the phones, in the ISPs, and the routers, and the computers, and the smart devices. It's going to be very hard to dig it out and get rid of it until we start having devices manufactured that we can certify for ourselves are free of this spyware. I miss my old Commodore 64 at this point. At least the NSA wasn't in there. Now, we're hearing stories from Snowden's lawyer that he would like to come back to the United States of America, which I understand. I know when I've worked in other countries, Germany, Italy, Britain, Australia, I get homesick real bad. I actually got offered Australian citizenship at one point, and I came real close to it, and at the last second I said, no, I'm an American, I want to go back to America. There are things there that need to be taken care of. All right, we're going to take a break for commercials. When we come back, we're going to get back to Edward Snowden and why they think it's okay for him to come home. I'm not sure I agree. We'll be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show here. And before we get back to Edward Snowden, I was looking at the Fox News feed, and the Warhawks are not giving up. Fox News was just doing a story about how documents recovered in Abbottabad from the Osama bin Laden compound prove that Iran was giving aid and comfort and shelter to the 9/11 terrorists. And, boy, they are shameless over there. First of all, we know that that was not Osama bin Laden at Abbottabad. The real Osama bin Laden died in late 2001 of natural causes. That's why whoever it was they did kill in Abbottabad had to be dumped in the ocean. And they flooded the net with these very poorly done fake photos that literally took an egg timer's worth of time to shred and prove that they were fakes. So now they're saying, we're just going through all the documents that we confiscated in Abbottabad, and we've found one that links Iran to 9/11, so forget about their building nuclear weapons. We've got to attack them because they're... And on and on and on. If at first you don't succeed, lie again. And it really does remind me of that old comedy TV show, Get Smart. It was one of Mel Brooks' first major successes, and they had this running gag. Would you believe we're surrounded by a battalion of crack combat troops? No, I wouldn't believe that. Well, would you believe there's 3 police cars out there? No, I wouldn't believe that. How about a Boy Scout and a toothless Doberman? And it would just get ridiculous. And that's where they are here right now. And they don't seem to understand. Every time they float another trial balloon and it fails, it just calls attention to the fact that that's what they're doing. Would you believe this? Would you believe that? Would you believe Iran is building nuclear weapons? No, I don't believe that. Would you believe they were connected to 9/11? No, I don't believe that either. And they keep on going. Now, getting on back to Edward Snowden, we have been hearing from his lawyer that Edward Snowden would like to come back home, which I understand. I would urge caution, obviously. And his supporters are saying that Edward Snowden deserves exactly the same treatment as Petraeus did, because General Petraeus violated the law, mishandled classified information to impress a girlfriend to get laid. Edward Snowden released confidential information as a whistleblower. It is inappropriate to charge him under the Espionage Act. And if Hillary Clinton did leak intelligence, as that early report says, she's actually more guilty of violating the Espionage Act than Edward Snowden is. But I don't think there's any way Edward Snowden would get a fair trial in this country. They want to make an example of him because there's a lot of people still in NSA and CIA and FBI who are fed up with what's going on, and they're in possession of very damaging information. For a while, Glenn Greenwald was dropping hints he had a second NSA source who'd come forward, who may have been found, neutralized, or just got cold feet. I'd like to see Edward Snowden get back home. I'd love to have him on the radio show. I think he's a hero. I think he deserves the Nobel Peace Prize, but he's not going to get it. They're going to do everything they can to nail him and make an example of him. Another little story over here in Tech Dirt. Encryption backdoors will always turn around and bite you in the rear. And they're talking about the fact that over the last couple of decades, 3 decades, going all the way back to the 1990s, the NSA has been installing backdoors in encryption and hardware devices, and they are still there, causing problems. Even if the NSA itself is not using them anymore, cyber criminals are finding them. That's what that freak malware is all about. They're exploiting the 1990s export-grade encryption limits. And they're saying backdoors are a bad idea. They cause more harm than good. And I'd like to remind everybody that if you need to protect your data from the U.S. government, and you do, invest the time in learning how to write enough code to come up with your own encryption. One that doesn't have an NSA backdoor. One that is strong. You get to pick your key links and methods. And I'm not saying this for criminals and terrorists. I'm talking to people who have business secrets to protect. I'm talking to people who have got very personal, private photographs that are nobody's business but their own. And if the U.S. government will not respect the Fourth Amendment, you have every right to take charge of and protect your own privacy. I'm sure Hillary Clinton was thinking that when she set up her private email server. And had she used that server only for her own personal emails, there wouldn't be an issue with that. So let's talk about human-caused global warming. Boy, is March starting off rough here. Investment Watch blog, 100 million in path of snow, ice mix, winter's last blast, ? Boston only 2 inches from snow record. Now the people in Boston are actually saying, yeah, give us a little more snow. We want the record. We want the record. Story out of CNN, no less. 94 million Americans say enough with winter already. Maybe, maybe not. It's a good thing. The snowstorm caused Washington, D.C. to shut down today. The White House canceled the daily press briefing. House Minority Leader Pelosi canceled her weekly press conference that morning. It's so cold in Washington, D.C., the politicians are walking around with their hands in their own pockets. WBUR, Boston gets more snow, inches closer to record. And here's where it gets interesting. It snowed on Huntington Beach, California, near Los Angeles yesterday. Snow on the beach. I don't remember the years I lived in L.A. ever seeing snow down there at sea level. Yeah, they get snow up in the Angeles Crest, San Gabriel Mountains. On Huntington Beach, there was snow. Buffalo News, cold pattern returns, possible record lows on Friday. Record snowfall hits North Texas. Record-setting snow closes schools, including DISD, and hampers road and air travel. This is in Dallas-Fort Worth. Flights canceled, snow builds again. North Texas hit with record snowfall. Fort Worth, a ghost town. Can't even get in there with all the snow. Kentucky has had to deploy their National Guard to rescue stranded motorists in the snow. We got hit here on the Big Island. The road up to the observatory has now been closed. I found this cool photograph of somebody snowboarding right next to the observatory. And we have another cold system coming in from the northwest due to hit sometime this weekend. When we come back from this commercial break, a couple of really bizarre stories that show you that the carbon Nazis are not discouraged by yet another record-setting winter in a row. They're still out there pushing the propaganda and the agenda. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show, and we're talking about human-caused global warming. Yesterday, we reported on this absolutely ludicrous story that came out of no less than MSNBC, claiming that the conflict in Syria was caused by global warming. No, actually it was caused by 3 years of covert U.S. efforts to regime change Damascus. But we're not going to talk about it. We'll blame global warming for it. Well, this seems to be a common thread that is popping up all over the mainstream media. We are seeing stories that claim that ISIS is the result of global warming. Had nothing to do with this destabilization campaign by the United States all over the Middle East. Foreign-backed invasions, coups d'etats, drone strikes, got nothing to do with it. ISIS exists because of human-caused global warming. This is not a joke. We're not talking about The Onion. We're talking about Slate, Wired, The Telegraph, NBC, and The Guardian, among others. That's the new talking point. You know, we've got to stop human-caused global warming because that's where ISIS is coming from. I think we need drug testing on these corporate media people. You know, forget about drug testing little children. They're harmless. These corporate media people, especially after the revelations from Brian Williams and Bill O'Reilly, proves that they actually can't tell what's reality anymore. Get a couple more flashbacks on our page about how when Walter Cronkite was predicting there would be a new ice age. And another flashback from 1985, where government scientists were predicting that by now, New York City would have the climate of Daytona Beach, Florida. Well, it must just be snowing like heck down in Daytona Beach, Florida, because that's what New York has right now. And every time you point out how these predictions have failed, like snowfalls are now a thing of the past, they'll come back and say, well, you know, back then our science wasn't exact. Trust us, it's a lot better now. No, we don't trust you until your theories accurately predict what's going on in the real world. And we know that these carbon Nazis do not look at the real world. They've set up a bunch of computer models that they're absolutely convinced will prove human-caused global warming. No, they don't. Computer models cannot prove anything. All computer models do is take the assumptions of the programmer through to the end. And if the assumptions of the programmer are wrong or incomplete, the computer run is worthless in terms of science. Maybe great for politics and propaganda and public relations. One thing that all of these computer models that have been wagged at us by the carbon Nazis over these years is they didn't take into account what happens if solar output drops, as it demonstrably is doing. And I have seen supporters of human-caused global warming's agenda come out and literally say, no, the sun has nothing to do with climate here on Earth. Really? Thought experiment. The sun vanishes tomorrow. What's going to happen to the climate here on Earth? Nonsense. I got a lot of positive emails and comments about yesterday's guest on the show and the documentary Trace Amounts here, and a lot of stories to send in to me. Over at Natural News, they call it the flu vaccine paradox. It's spreading globally as vaccinated people are catching the flu. There are now 6 separate studies showing that if you get the seasonal flu shot, you are more likely of getting the flu. If the flu shot is not actually infecting you with the flu, it is suppressing your immune system and increasing the risk of infection. That's not what vaccines are supposed to do. It's claimed that getting the vaccine boosts your immune system. It's not working. And now they want to basically argue against informed consent. They want to mandate vaccines for everybody because it's all driven by the money. Now, there's a very bizarre story going on, and I'm not sure I'm ready to say that I trust it yet, but I think it's worth talking about. And it has to do with this guy named Joseph Moshe, who was arrested in Los Angeles following a police chase. They had him in his VW Beetle. They shot all this tear gas in there and tasered him and dragged him away and saying he was a terrorist. He was threatening the White House. Well, there's a different story emerging because apparently this Joseph Moshe, he's a dual citizen with Israel, and he's a microbiologist. And apparently his story is that he has uncovered evidence that there is a flu vaccine being manufactured that, in fact, contains live flu virus and could potentially be a biological weapon. And it involves a company called Baxter, which is already on record for having shipped flu vaccine with live virus to over a dozen countries. And they were involved in this horrible case over in Poland, where homeless people were rounded up for tests of a vaccine, and something like 100 of them died. It's a scenario right out of the movie, The Constant Gardener, which if you have not seen it, it's Ralph Fiennes and Rachel Weisz. And that's actually based on a true story as well. But they've grabbed this guy, and apparently he's been sent back to Israel. And you have to scratch your head. He's basically saying that this vaccine being made suppresses your immune system with some of its adjuvants, which we're seeing in the current flu vaccine, and it contains an RNA flu virus that is apparently reconstructed from the 1918 flu pandemic. And it sounds a little out there, I will grant you, but we know the ultra-wealthy want to get rid of all of us useless eaters. We know about National Security Study Memorandum 200. And once again, I want to hit this story, and this is being repeated over in David Icke's website, where they have discovered down in Africa, these tetanus vaccine campaigns are all about clandestine population control. And there have now been 3 of these scandals. And they were wise to it because the normal tetanus vaccination is just 1 shot. And this vaccination program, which was funded in part by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, involved 5 vaccinations over 6 months. And that's not usual. So they took some of this vaccine and they had it tested, and they found it was laced with the pregnancy hormone human chorionic gonadotropin. And what these 5 shots do, and they're all on females only of childbearing age. Old ladies don't get them, men don't get them. And when you've been exposed to this HCG, your body starts treating a pregnancy as if it is an infection. You spontaneously abort, and you cannot have children. And we've hit this story before, and I wanted to hit it again because we're hearing all this talk about mandatory vaccinations in the U.S. Is there anybody listening to this show who is so naive that they think the U.S. government would not use this same mechanism to get rid of undesirable segments of the population here in the U.S., like those with the intelligence to ask embarrassing questions? We don't need those smarties in our population. We've got all these illegal immigrants to do the jobs now. We can get rid of the smart people here. Now, there's been a lab incident involving a pathogen called Burkholderia pseudomallum, which was being studied as a potential bioterror weapon at this lab, the Tulane National Primate Research Center near New Orleans. It somehow got out of the lab. 4 monkeys and 1 human have already been infected with it. Now, as of today, a 5th monkey is showing signs of the infection, according to USA Today. They don't know how it got out of the lab and how it is spreading. I can almost hear the White House now. ISIS is terrorizing monkeys. We have to bomb them now. I guess they dropped a really bad beaker. We got to take a break. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And let me just check something real quick. Breaking news. I normally don't do entertainment news, but I'm a huge admirer. Apparently Harrison Ford has crashed his small plane on an LA golf course. He's hurt, unfortunately. Apparently they're saying seriously. Critically, in fact, according to Variety. So I hope for the best for him. Now, getting on back to all this vaccine and population control, it's certainly not a new idea. And I've often wondered if one of the agendas of the world wars is forced depopulation. Because if you go back to big mistake number 1 and you look at the method of trench warfare, it almost seems designed to kill the maximum number of people with the least damage to the real estate. They dig a couple of trenches, put soldiers on both sides, and then get them to run across to the other side through cross-machine gun fire. Then Germany collapsed, and it's almost like somebody said, we didn't get rid of enough people. Because just as World War I was winding down, we got the 1918 outbreak of the Spanish flu. And that name is deceptive. The 1918 flu outbreak did not come from Spain. It originated in a U.S. military base from some vaccine trials. Camp Funston, in fact. And the soldiers were then quickly deployed to the rest of the world, and the disease went with them. And more people died from the Spanish flu outbreak, or the Camp Funston outbreak, than had actually died in World War I. And we have been hearing politicians for decades talking about getting rid of the useless eaters. And Tom Clancy, who was amazingly prescient about global politics back when he wrote his own books, before he started getting ghostwriters. In his book, Rainbow Six, he talked about a group of ultra-rich people who had all the wealth and palaces, and they wanted the rest of the human race to go away so they could live with nature from inside their multi-million-dollar palaces. And their plan was to trigger a pandemic and then offer a vaccine for it that actually would cause more of the pandemic. So it's not like these are new concepts at all. And we really ought to be concerned about all these people, like Bill Gates, who's running around with his, $78 billion fortune saying, we need to get rid of all the people on planet Earth. Anyway, we're hearing a story coming out of CTV News. Apparently, envelopes with white powder were sent to 3 federal cabinet ministers. Oh my goodness, it's white powder! White powder! Head for the hills! It's acts of terror! It's probably just global warming coming in through the mail slot. Now here's a story over at the Daily Mail. We have been hearing from the purveyors of GMO that as long as you have a buffer zone of 65 feet, that the GMO pollen from your crops will not contaminate natural organic crops nearby. 65 feet, that's the official designation. But apparently, research has now shown that the pollen from genetically modified corn say that wind alone can carry it a documented 2.7 miles. And don't forget, we had a big stink in the United States last year, where wheat farms in Oregon were found to be contaminated with GMO pollen from non-approved experimental wheat plots several states away. It's like the people doing GMO never heard about things like birds or bees or migratory animals. So all of a sudden there is a huge call for a ban on GM corn in Europe. And it's being led in Germany, and of course the transatlantic partnership deal that they're talking about would force GMO on Europe. Ukraine is having to accept GMO as part of a condition for their latest IMF bailout. Over in Minnesota and Indiana, they're proposing new GMO labeling laws, like the one that was passed in Vermont. The GMO companies are still trying to lobby the federal government for a ban on GMO labeling. They're not getting anywhere with that. They're trying this idea of saying, well, let's just put the GMO identification in the barcode, because it would be really expensive and costly to reprint all the food labels to put GMO on the front. Well, you know something? It's going to cost you just as much to reprint those labels with the new barcode. What they're hoping is that people won't be able to look at the barcode and understand what they're looking at. It's a way of hiding what's going on as opposed to GMO. And they know that GMO is questionable. If they really, truly thought GMO was beneficial and positive, they would have spent the money to relabel the products a long time ago. Contains more GMO than our competing product. GMO is great. We've got it right here. Come in and buy it. Now, there's another story coming out of The Guardian. And it has to do with a pesticide, actually 31 pesticides being sold in Europe that contain hormone-mimicking chemicals. And apparently there was a science paper that linked these hormone-mimicking chemicals with fetal abnormalities, genital mutations, infertility, and adverse health effects ranging from cancer to loss of IQ. And now apparently it's come out this paper was buried by the top EU officials under pressure, meaning campaign donation checks from big chemical firms that use these endocrine-disrupting chemicals in toiletries, plastics, cosmetics. And it's estimated the annual health costs from exposure to these EDCs run at hundreds of millions of euros. And I'm sure the chemical companies are saying, well, you know, if the slaves get sick, that's good for the economy because then they have to go buy more medications. And so everybody wins. Sort of. Kind of. Now, here's one that is really going to raise your hair. This is over at Truth Stream Media. We've been talking about the evils of fracking and how fracking more properly, to be safe, to not contaminate groundwater, should be done with water. It's just a hydraulic process, but they have these fracking chemicals which are supposed to be about weakening and loosening the rocks, and then we discovered that these fracking companies are actually contracting with other industries to pump toxic waste down into the ground that they couldn't dispose of any other way. And now, apparently, documents have surfaced from the 1960s showing how Halliburton and Company was disposing of nuclear waste by mixing it in with their fracking fluid. Nuclear waste, the stuff that is dangerous. They're pumping it into the ground and just saying, trust us, it'll never come to the surface, and yet we know it does. And our government looks the other way, just like they look the other way to Deepwater Horizon and WIP and Hanford. I actually mentioned the fact in the video that we did, What Are They Thinking?, that some of the components of fracking fluid were radioactive. I didn't realize it was that bad. It's nuclear waste. Apparently, the Oklahoma state government has known that fracking was causing the sudden surge of quakes in their state. They sat on that one to please the oil fracking companies. The entire system has become corrupted by greed. They are not looking out for what's best for the country as a whole, the state as a whole, what's best for the people. It's all about, yeah, whatever you want, give me a big campaign check and we'll change the laws so you can do whatever you want to do. And that is fascism. And that is where the United States has sunk to today. We are a fascist economic dictatorship. We are not capitalist. We're not a republic. We are not a democracy. That's the reality. Get used to it. There's the music. I got to go do some animation work to pay the bills around here. We'll be back tomorrow here on the Genesis Communication Network. Until then, stay safe, stay informed, stay skeptical, get angry, share what you know with who you know. Please support Genesis and WhatReallyHappened.com. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.